Some nights in baseball give you everything at once. They give you the kind of performance that reminds you why you fell in love with the sport in the first place. The kind of night where the ball jumps off the bat differently, where the crowd noise reaches a frequency that vibrates somewhere deep in your chest, where you find yourself watching something and knowing, even as it happens, that you are going to remember this. Tuesday night was that kind of night. Shohei Ohtani stepped to the plate with 2 runners on base, the game hanging in that specific tension that only a bases-loaded situation with a dangerous hitter can create, and he did what Shohei Ohtani does when the moment is largest and the stakes are highest. He hit the ball so hard and so far that the debate afterward was not whether it was a home run but how many rows deep it landed. 3 runs scored. The stadium erupted. And Ohtani rounded the bases in that familiar, unhurried way, calm at the center of complete chaos, completing his first home run of the 2025 season in the most Ohtani way imaginable. Not a solo shot. Not a quiet, individual moment. A 3-run bomb that lifted his team, shifted the entire complexion of the game, and announced his arrival in the 2025 season with the kind of authority that only he can deliver. But here is the thing about that night. The home run was not even the most important story. Because somewhere across that same diamond, in a moment that happened quietly and without cameras positioned to capture it properly, Kyle Tucker, in his first season as a Dodger, still finding his footing in a new city with a new team and new expectations, hit his own first home run since joining Los Angeles. And after the game, when the American media gathered around Tucker's locker and asked him what the night meant, he told them a story about Shohei Ohtani. A story that nobody in that press room expected. A story that spread across baseball media within hours and reached beyond it entirely by morning. A story so simple and so human that it left people, reporters who cover professional sports for a living and believe they have heard everything, genuinely moved. To understand why Tucker's story about Ohtani hit the way it did, you have to understand what Kyle Tucker carried with him when he arrived in Los Angeles. On paper, the trade that brought Tucker to the Dodgers was a blockbuster. A proven, elite outfielder joining the most star-studded roster in baseball. The kind of move that generates weeks of analysis and universal praise from every corner of the sport. But trades are not experienced on paper. They are experienced by human beings who have to pack their lives, leave the place they built their professional identity, say goodbye to teammates who became family, and walk into a new clubhouse where the relationships, the rhythms, and the unspoken understandings of a team have already been established without them. Tucker had spent his entire major league career in Houston. He had grown up professionally as an Astro. His relationships in that clubhouse, the comfort of knowing exactly where he stood and exactly what was expected of him, all of that was left behind when the trade was finalized. What he was walking into in Los Angeles was extraordinary by any external measure. The talent around him was unprecedented. The organization's resources and preparation are the envy of every other team in baseball. The expectations are enormous and the spotlight is relentless. For some players, that combination is energizing. For others, the transition period, no matter how talented the player, no matter how strong their character, carries a quiet difficulty that rarely gets acknowledged publicly. Tucker arrived, went through spring training, and started the regular season without his first home run as a Dodger. Not a crisis. Not even a story, really, given how early the season was. But the kind of detail a player is always aware of, that first signature moment as a member of a new team, the moment that feels like a proper arrival rather than just a presence. He was waiting for that moment. And in the meantime, something was happening in the Dodgers clubhouse that Tucker had not fully anticipated. Professional sports clubhouses have a culture that is almost impossible to describe accurately from the outside. Every team's clubhouse is different, different energy, different hierarchies, different unwritten rules about how veterans interact with newer arrivals, about who leads and how, about what gets said openly and what gets communicated in other ways. Tucker had heard about the Dodgers clubhouse before he arrived. Every player in baseball has. The roster is so exceptional that the culture surrounding it carries its own mythology, stories about preparation standards, about the level of professionalism expected, about what it means to be part of an organization operating at that level daily. What he did not expect, or perhaps what exceeded even his elevated expectations, was Ohtani. Not Ohtani the player. He knew exactly what Ohtani the player was. Every professional in baseball knows. Ohtani the teammate. Tucker described it in careful, genuine terms when the media asked him about it after his home run. He said that from his very first days in the clubhouse, before he had established any real rhythm as a Dodger, before he had done anything to earn a particular claim on Ohtani's time or attention, Ohtani had simply been present. Not in a formal, organized mentorship way. Not in the way a team assigns veterans to look after new arrivals. But in the quiet, consistent, entirely natural way of a person who is simply paying attention to the people around him and responding to what he sees. Ohtani noticed Tucker finding his footing. And without making it a project or a gesture or anything that called attention to itself, he made himself available. The specific story Tucker shared that night was this. About 2 weeks into the season, Tucker had arrived at the stadium earlier than usual. He had things he wanted to work on, adjustments he was processing from recent at-bats, and he wanted quiet time in the cage before the building filled up with the organized noise of a full team preparing for a game. He was in the batting cage alone, working through his swing, when Ohtani walked in. Not because he had been told to. Not because a coach had arranged it. Simply because Ohtani had also arrived early, as he almost always does, and the cage was where his preparation was taking him that morning. They worked separately at first. Two professionals doing what professionals do, focused, purposeful, not requiring conversation to coexist productively in a shared space. But at a certain point, Ohtani stopped. Watched Tucker for a moment. And then said something. Tucker paused in his post-game press conference recounting this, and the reporters in the room leaned in slightly without realizing they were doing it. What Ohtani said was not a technical observation about Tucker's swing mechanics. It was not an instruction or a correction or the kind of professional advice that flows naturally between experienced players. It was simpler than any of that. He said, "You look like you belong here." 4 words. Tucker said he almost did not respond right away because the simplicity of it caught him off guard. Coming from most people, that sentence might land as routine encouragement, the kind of thing you say to someone who seems uncertain, a reassurance that is kind but not particularly meaningful. Coming from Ohtani, in that specific moment, it meant something entirely different. Because Ohtani does not say things he does not mean. Everyone who has spent time around him consistently describes a person of extraordinary intentionality, someone who pays attention before he speaks, who observes carefully before he responds, who never fills silence with words simply for the sake of filling it. When Ohtani told Tucker he looked like he belonged, he was not offering empty encouragement. He was delivering a genuine observation from a person who had been watching, who notices things others miss, and who had decided that Tucker needed to hear something specific in that moment. Tucker said, "I didn't realize how much I needed somebody to say that until he said it." There is something important in what Tucker described that goes beyond a heartwarming clubhouse anecdote. Professional athletes at the highest level carry an internal narrative about themselves that runs constantly beneath the surface of performance. Statistics matter. Results matter. But the story a player tells himself about where he stands, whether he belongs, whether he is truly part of something, that internal narrative shapes everything, including the very performances that generate the statistics. Tucker had arrived in Los Angeles surrounded by external validation. The trade coverage, the expectations, the organizational belief in him, all of it was loudly positive. And yet externally positive narratives do not always reach the internal place where a player's confidence either holds or wavers. What Ohtani gave Tucker in that cage was not information. Tucker already had all the information. He knew his career numbers. He knew what the Dodgers had given up to acquire him. He knew what the organization believed about his ability. What Ohtani gave him was something that only genuine human connection can deliver, the felt sense of being truly seen by someone whose perception you trust absolutely. When the person widely considered the greatest player in the world watches you swing a bat and tells you that you look like you belong, something shifts. Not in your mechanics. Not in your data. In you. In the story you tell yourself when you step into the batter's box and the moment asks you who you are. Tucker's first home run as a Dodger came not long after that morning in the cage. Whether the connection is direct or simply the natural result of a player finding his footing is not something anyone can say definitively. Tucker himself was careful not to oversimplify it. But he was also honest enough to acknowledge that the conversation happened, that it mattered, and that Ohtani's 4 words stayed with him in the at-bats that followed. When the game itself is examined in full, what stands out is not just the individual performances but the way they intersected. Ohtani's 3-run home run came in a moment of genuine consequence, runners on base, a close game, the kind of at-bat where the outcome changes the entire shape of what follows. He did not just hit a home run. He hit the right home run at the right moment, delivering maximum value at maximum pressure, which is the defining characteristic of truly elite performers across every sport. Tucker's home run carried its own emotional weight, the first as a Dodger, arriving after weeks of transition and adjustment, landing in the middle of a night where the team was playing its best baseball and the stadium energy was at its highest. 2 players delivering on the same night. 2 home runs in the same game. And after the game, in the press conference where reporters expected standard post-game analysis, one of those players told a story about the other that reframed the entire evening. The baseball was spectacular. But the story underneath the baseball, the morning in the cage, the 4 words, the quiet act of one extraordinary person genuinely seeing another, was what people carried home with them. Leadership in professional sports is one of the most discussed and least understood concepts in the game. It gets attached to captaincies and pre-game speeches and visible, dramatic acts of competitive will. It gets measured in statistics and clutch performance and the ability to elevate a team when everything is on the line. All of those things are real. But the leadership Tucker described, the quiet, attentive, entirely unperformed act of noticing that a teammate needed something and providing it without being asked, is a different kind of leadership entirely. And in many ways, it is the harder and more valuable kind. Anyone can lead loudly when the crowd is watching. Very few people lead quietly when nobody is paying attention. Ohtani leads quietly. In batting cages at early hours. In 4-word sentences delivered at exactly the right moment. In 10 minutes of ordinary conversation offered freely to someone who needed it. In the consistent, daily practice of paying attention to the people around him and responding to what he actually sees rather than what is convenient or expected. The Dodgers are built around extraordinary individual talent. But what Tucker's story revealed is that the team's greatest competitive advantage may not be what any individual player does on the field. It may be the culture that flows from who the best player in the world chooses to be when the cameras are off and the game has not yet started. That culture, of attention, of genuine care, of choosing to see your teammates as people rather than simply as professional colleagues, is Ohtani's most lasting contribution to every team he has ever been part of. The box score from that Tuesday night will show 2 home runs from the Dodgers, one a 3-run blast from Ohtani, one a solo shot from Tucker. It will show a win. It will show statistics that analysts will fold into their seasonal projections and use to update their assessments of where Los Angeles stands in the early 2025 landscape. All of that is real and all of it matters in the context of a long baseball season. But what that night left behind, beyond the numbers, beyond the standings, beyond the early season narrative, is a story about 2 professional athletes and a morning in a batting cage and 4 words that landed exactly where they needed to land. Tucker stood at that post-game podium and told reporters something honest. He did not have to. He could have answered the home run question with standard professional language about staying with his process and trusting his preparation. Nobody would have pushed further. But he chose to tell the truth instead. He chose to give credit where credit genuinely belonged, not to a coaching adjustment or a mechanical fix, but to a teammate who noticed him, saw him clearly, and said something simple and real. Ohtani, for his part, will almost certainly never mention it. That is entirely consistent with who he is. The things he does quietly are never done for acknowledgement. They are done because he is paying attention, and because paying attention, to him, is simply what a good teammate does. The home run announced his 2025 season to the world. But the story Tucker told announced something larger and more enduring. It announced the kind of person standing in the middle of this Dodgers team, and the kind of effect that person has on everyone fortunate enough to share a clubhouse with him. That is the real story of Tuesday night. And that is why nobody who heard it will forget it anytime soon.